very much for that, Judy, and it's very difficult following the previous speaker particularly. And I just want to say first of all what a pleasure it is to be invited to come and speak at an election meeting in Coventry alongside Dave, a good socialist who run tried and tested campaigns for ordinary people's jobs, ordinary people's services, to defend what we've got and to try and pass something on better to our children, as Dave was saying at the end there. It's a great privilege to be invited to come and join you on the last weekend before the local elections take place next Thursday, the 3rd of May. And Judy said a little bit about me, and I want to say, first of all, I'm the national president and elected rank and file official, the most senior official in our union. I am very proud to be associated with a union that has decided to take its political destiny into its own hands and to develop, along with other trade unionists, along with socialists, campaigners for public services, an attempt to rebuild a political response, a political alternative to the conformity that we're faced with every single day on the television news, on the radio and in the press. The false belief, the fallacy that we are fed that the only realistic economic response to the global economic crisis caused by the bankers, the turbo speculation which took place for the last 25 years and ended in the global economic crisis of 2007-2008, that the only economic realistic response to that is to slaughter public services, privatise public services, outsource public service jobs to companies like Serco, Capita, G4S and the various other vultures that are hovering around public services, whether it be the prison service or schools or hospitals, or whether it be your local services in the local authority in Coventry and in towns and cities up and down this country. And we've looked at the situation. We've looked at the situation very calmly and rationally. We are not a political party, we're a trade union, but we recognise that workers came together and combined historically in trade unions in order to defend their interests as workers. And their interests as workers are class interests. They're not just the interests of the members of the trade union, they're the interests of our families as well. They're the interests of people who rely on public services. They're the interests of workers who absolutely fought for in the past and must fight for today the democratic right to control the societies they live in, including the right, for example, to have a say over who runs their public services. And our conclusion, when we've debated at our national conference and in our national executive committee, the question of what we should do politically, is that it's a complicated world. We're reacting to events, as somebody famous once said, history, men and women make history, but not in the circumstances of their own choosing. And what we are at the moment, comrades, brothers and sisters, is we're in a very deep hole, and all of the three main political parties have got a policy that we should keep on digging. And it's important that in this election and after this election there are prominent public voices saying from elected platforms, whether in Coventry or London or Liverpool or any other city in this country, or whether it be prominent trade unionists, there is an alternative. Because contrary to what you hear in the media, every reputable academic economist knows that the current policies that are being pursued by the British government, by George Osborne, by Danny Alexander, by Cable, by Cameron and Clegg, those policies which are echoed by their so-called opposition in the House of Commons, Ed Balls and Ed Miliband, those policies are driving the world into a recession which will be greater than the depression of the 1930s. We have just had announced this week the news that we are now officially into a double-dip recession. That has been long predicted by everyone who studies the dismal science of economics, that if all the major economies in the world all decide at the same time to cut their expenditure, then what happens to the aggregate demand of the world economy is that it shrinks. And when the aggregate demand of the world economy shrinks, you de facto have a depression. And that is where we're heading at the moment. And in a depression, very frightening things happen. Scary things happen. The world is turned upside down, and not in a good way. We've just seen last Sunday in France the first round of voting in the French presidential elections, where a fascist candidate who didn't run a campaign that was in any way hiding her racism or the tradition of far-right politics that she stands in, Marine Le Pen, Baby Le Pen, got 20% of the vote. 1 in 5 French voters who voted in the presidential elections last weekend voted for an out-and-out Nazi. And, I mean, she actually ran her campaign, her presidential campaign, around the rehabilitation. One of the major planks of her presidential campaign was the rehabilitation of a collaborationist French Nazi wartime journalist who used to write articles in French newspapers under the German occupation, advocating that not only Jewish families should be sent to the death camps, but their children should be sent to the death camps with them. And he, after the war, was the only French collaborator who was tried, judged, found guilty and executed for the crime of calling for genocide without actually having pulled the trigger himself. All of the other French collaborators who were executed after the liberation in 1944-45 were people who had literally blood on their hands. He was the only one executed for writing articles advocating the murder of Jewish children. And Marine Le Pen made her election campaign essentially about rehabilitating the reputation of this Nazi collaborator. And yet 1 in 5 voters who voted in France bothered to vote for a fascist. I mean, this is a staggering fact. And if we think over here, just the other side of the channel, that we're going to be any different, and you know, things are a bit different. The history of this country is not the same as the history of France. The French far right has a mass political tradition which they have never managed to gain in Britain. But if we think that failing, that what happens in France won't come over the water and happen here, then we're making a big mistake. So one of the key lessons that I want to derive from what Dave has said in his remarks this afternoon to you is that the importance of putting a socialist alternative to voters in St Michael's ward and in every other ward in Coventry isn't just about the good, decent, rational reasons that we all know about, saving Falls Hill baths, saving the local library, saving your local schools, stopping the vultures from G4S, Capita, Serco and the other privatisation merchants getting their hands on our public assets. All of that we should be teaching people, talking to them about on the doorstep and explaining to them why it's a massive problem coming straight at us very, very fast. But the thing that we've got to understand, we, the ones who bother to turn up to political meetings to rally around Dave, the ones who go out and campaign on the doorstep, is that the importance of us doing that is of historic importance. Because if we don't put a real, viable, socialist alternative to people on their doorsteps, in local elections, in parliamentary elections, in European elections, in places where they get a chance to cast their vote, then very, very soon we will be in a situation where the far right in this country are able to profit from the fact that no one is putting any alternative to the austerity agenda. And I think it was George Galloway at the Bradford West by-election a couple of weeks ago who said, you know, that the three parties are like three cheeks of the same arse. And, you know, I don't agree with him about many things, but it's undoubtedly the case that in the Labour Party, the Tory Party and the Lib Dems, we have three parties who fundamentally accept the economic rationale for a cuts agenda, austerity. As Dave said, Labour quibbles about how far and how fast it should go. Well, not how far it should go, but how fast it should go. Whether to go longer and more shallow cuts, or whether it to be quick and deep. The Lib Dems, as Lib Dems do, make opportunist points about not cutting this and cutting something else instead. Even in the Tory party, Dave, there are now divisions emerging about what pace to proceed with neoliberal cuts. I mean, Liam Fox, the man who you will recall was forced to resign as Minister of Defence because of his unusual employment practices. Liam Fox was in the news yesterday advocating a radical project of deregulating employment rights, and that is a polite euphemism for saying making it easier to sack workers, making it more dangerous for workers to go to work, doing away with the very few health and safety rules and employment rules which protect your rights as workers, whether you work in a unionised workplace or a non-unionised workplace. And there are very few rights that we do have as workers in this country, but Liam Fox thinks that the solution to the double-dip recession is apparently to get rid of those rights that we do have. So, faced with three parties of austerity, privatisation and war, what is TUSC saying? And the reason, by the way, I mean, I'm here speaking with Dave, who's standing as a socialist alternative candidate. I regard the Trade Union Socialist Coalition as being a coalition with socialist alternative in its warp and weft, and we're standing on a completely identical platform in London to the platform that Dave is standing on with his colleagues here in Coventry. What are we saying? What are our arguments? Well, we're calling for, in a context where the problem with the economy is that capitalist firms and banks are hoarding money. Dave talked about £731 billion reported of capital being hoarded by British banks and corporations, partly because they haven't got the confidence to invest it in production at a time when people don't have money to buy goods, but also partly because what they all expect, of course, is that there's going to be a crash in the stock market, and just around the corner they'll be able to buy up other big companies. So hoarding money at the moment, which is going on, in the expectation of a crash so that you can corner the market in whatever it is that you make by buying up all your rivals, that is a surefire way to end up in a massive depression with even higher unemployment than the 3 million that we have in this country at the moment. And if you think that's bad, look at the figures which have just come out this week in Spain, because the Spanish unemployment figures, this is not in one town in Spain or one region in Spain, this is the national unemployment figure for young people in Spain is now over 50%. The national unemployment figure for youth in Spain, over 50%. The national unemployment figure for all ages in Spain is over 25%. 1 in 4 of the workforce out of work. There are 1.75 million families in Spain without a single breadwinner, without a single person able to earn a wage. It's a society that, I mean, it's a society on the verge of a nervous breakdown, as the Spanish film director, whatever his name was, nearly said a few years ago. So what do we need? Well, the first thing we need is to promote jobs with a living wage for all. We need to raise the national minimum wage. The national minimum wage is barely enough to live on. In the budget, disgracefully, George Osborne not only did he let the super rich get away with an enormous tax bills that we've been reading about for the last 3 or 4 weeks, but something that's been glossed over, but ought to be remembered, is that he froze the national minimum wage for workers between the ages of 16 and 18. So in a workplace now, you not only have a situation where you've got people on workfare being forced to work for practically nothing, or 10 or 20 pounds a week. But you also now have workers, the youngest workers, the most vulnerable workers in the workplace, who are working on a national minimum wage that is even lower than the national minimum wage that applies to all other adult workers. That's a disgrace, but it's also economic madness. Because if you want to stimulate the economy, and you do it by giving tax breaks to the mega rich, which is what this government does, then the mega rich will go and buy a yacht, or they will go and buy a high-performance sports car. But probably that high-performance sports car won't be made in Coventry. It will be made by Porsche in Frankfurt. It will be made wherever else in the world they make high-performance sports cars these days. The fact is, if you want to stimulate the economy to get aggregate demand and growth increasing, then the people that you need to give money to is the lowest paid people in society. Because they won't be using it primarily for savings, they will be using it to spend on things that they need to feed their kids, to get clothes for their children, to make improvements in their life, and they will give money to shopkeepers, to people in their communities to do jobs for them. They will increase aggregate demand. The key people to get us out of the recession in this country are unemployed people and low-paid workers. We need to increase benefits, increase wages, and that is the key to getting demand increasing and growth back into the economy. And that is what TUSC is saying very clearly, in complete and utter contradiction to all of the other political parties in this election. We're the only people saying that, not the Greens, not anyone else that's got that message. Secondly, we need fully funded public services instead of the disgrace. I mean, defending public services against cuts is important, but I wouldn't want anyone to think that we have lavishly funded public services in this country. What we have is underfunded public services, and we need to get back to a situation where people value, people in government, in authority, value and respect public service workers and the services that they deliver, which they don't at the moment. We need to say very clearly, and I've said this several times, but I'm going to reiterate it, TUSC is opposed to all cuts. We believe we must put people before profit. The cuts agenda is an agenda that is wrong in principle, and now we can see, because of the economic statistics around the double-dip recession last week, it's been proven to be wrong as well in practice. We need massive investment in cheap, efficient and safe public transport. With great respect to the engineering workers at Coventry, Dave, who built a lot of those marvellous motor cars out there. You know, the age of the car is coming to an end. What we need investment in is the kind of carbon fibre technologies, the power generation technologies, which can lead to public transport that is truly accessible because it's free or cheap enough for ordinary people to use, and connects us to towns and cities and different parts of the towns that we live in easily, without problems, allows us to not just travel if we're able-bodied, but also allow people who've got restricted movement, or are disabled or registered blind or whatever it might be, to travel safely in confidence in public transport. The investment that is necessary in this type of green public transport technologies is absolutely massive. I mean, it's in the order of billions and billions of pounds. In fact, currently it's the money that's being hoarded by the banks and should be being spent on developing safe, high-speed transport between Britain's cities, to give people access to culture, education and work more easily, and also should be used in cities to develop tram systems, to develop accessible bus systems, and to develop safe, cheap and efficient public transport for all. TUSC is also standing on a platform of saying categorically, we've got to, and it's important to have to say this at this meeting, it's unfortunate, but it's important to have to say this, equality for all, no to racism. There has been, and I'm not sure if this has been picked up on in the local election campaigns in Coventry, but certainly at the moment in London, where I'm standing as a candidate for the Trade Union Socialist Coalition, there is been a wave of stories coming out over the past month and a half about police abuse and harassment of black people. and indeed my union is currently in the process of funding a family called the Alder family, who are trying to get a judicial review over the death of Christopher Alder, their relative who died from mysterious wounds received in a police station in Hull a few years ago. But it's important to have to restate this at this point when we are facing, you know, I think it was an R.M. Bevan, the founder of the National Health Service, the great socialist, who said socialism is the language. I've got the quote now. The language of priorities. The language of priorities. Thank you. Yeah, I was going to say the language of choice, but that's blaring. Socialism is the language of priorities. But you know, in a period of austerity, we're being told something sinister and that can be mistaken for the language of priorities, which is you have to decide which community is going to take the cuts hardest. And in that situation, what we're seeing is that racism and attempts to divide people, divide working class people in different communities, comes to the fore. We need a political response that stands up clearly against racism and stands up to it, whether or not it's police racism or whether it's racism in the community being doled out from whatever source it comes. And TUSC is standing, and this is where I'm going to finish talking about the TUSC campaign. TUSC is standing clearly behind the demand for education to be free, as health services must remain free. Education is a right, not a privilege, and we need to restate that, because all of the other political parties in this campaign have given up on the concept of free education, further education, higher education, and soon it will be primary and secondary education as well. So, I want to finish by saying I'm very pleased to see RMT members at this meeting, not just from Coventry, but to be speaking with Dave here from Rugby and Nuneaton. We've, as a union, tried to take a discussion and a debate out amongst our membership in order to get them to develop their own conclusions in line with our union's democratically decided policies about how we can fight to put the socialist alternative back on the agenda. And people like Dave Goodwin, people like Paul Riley, who's standing as a TUSC candidate in Nuneaton, is here, joined us in the front row. And I'm very pleased that they've stepped up to the mark to do that. It's important that trade unionists do that, even though it might seem as though, you know, you're slogging your guts out for very little reward sometimes standing in local elections as a socialist candidate. But here, in Coventry, and particularly in St Michael's ward, that is not the case. You're not slogging your guts out for very little reward. What we need to slog our guts out for is to make sure that we retain in St Michael's a proven socialist representative of working people, and we need to fight to make sure that we get right behind Dave's campaign in the 5 or 6 remaining days that are left until the election. Anyone who hasn't been canvassed, and I don't think there is anyone who hasn't been canvassed in St Michael's ward, needs to be out there and canvassed, and anyone who has been canvassed needs to be canvassed again. And when it comes to the election day, I know that the election machine, the well-oiled Nellist socialist alternative election machine in Coventry, will make sure that people are cajoled and persuaded to get down to the polling booth and to put their cross in the right box. Let's make sure that in this town we stand up for a socialist alternative on the 3rd of May, and that's part of a national struggle, but it's also part of an international struggle that decent, ordinary, working people all over the world are part of.